I'm sure for many of you, they'll be familiar. I'm guessing we have some people versed in banking in the audience, maybe not everyone. What John and I are going to talk about is two versions of the future. So just to introduce ourselves, John Phenix, standing on my left, waiting for his turn, is a lead API architect at HSBC, years and years of experience in banking APIs and architecture, maybe the most knowledgeable banking API architect in the world. And he's currently doing some crazy stuff at HSBC, so he's going to give you some insight into what's happening. He's graciously invited me to give a little bit of what's happening at a macro level. My name's Ronnie Mitra. I work at a consultancy, a transformation consultancy called Publicis Sapient. And I've been working with John on some of this. And following this trend, I was also here at the first Apidays 10 years ago in a small school, also near the Boulevard Paris. And of course, you heard from this morning, APIs existed before Apidays, right? So I think the tagline of that first event was the first international API conference in Europe, or something like that, right? It was very, specific. At that time, it had been all vendors, right? This was the first event that brought a community together. It was a small community, really focused on things like, someone would have a slide with the planet Earth, and how do we connect everyone together? Very aspirational. Banks were at that first event, talking about banking APIs. The banking APIs they talked about in that event don't exist today, right? These were experiments. And a lot of what people were doing at that time was based on what Netflix was talking about and Twitter was talking about. Netflix went around telling people about if you planted seeds, 1,000 seeds, some flowers would bloom. So what we were doing was creating APIs in the hopes that maybe someone will build the ultimate application on top of it. And I get that benefit. Largely, none of that came to pass, right? In the time between then and now, the banking world went through this phase of compliance, especially in Europe, right? Because of PSD2 and things like this. So we saw an era of execution. And what I would argue now, we're shifting into an era of opportunity and opportunistic businesses, right? Shifting very much away from, you could argue, that early openness and experimentation phase we had before. So if I lay that out, what that looks like is, 10 years ago, we were thinking if we build it, they'll come, right? Very technology-driven. Technology teams building for developers, right? It's all about the developer experience. Developers coming together. We were talking about how we shift from SOAP to REST and what this means for the world. Then we went through a phase of ecosystem-driven implementations, right? The regulators, the government says you have to open up. So we focused on modernizing. And the work became a catalyst for some digital change. And now it's quite different, what I see starting to build. We see business-driven partnerships and monetization programs. If you're in a bank, if you're in a large enterprise working on APIs, this means you're becoming more relevant. But it also means you don't have the long-term platform vision, right? Your businesses are looking for opportunities, and they're trying to drive revenue quarter on quarter. It's a serious mind shift change. We're seeing terminology develop that describes things we had been talking about forever, but you give something a name, and it takes off. Right? Embedded finance, or banking as a service. Embedded finance talks about taking parts of your bank, the user experience, and embedding it in someone else's application. With banking as a service, we're just talking APIs. But somehow this idea of BaaS, banking APIs powering other applications, is hockey sticking up in terms of interest, right? And then finally, you have this idea of the coreless bank, or what I've called before, the borderless bank, where the capabilities of the bank come from outside the bank, other people's APIs. So we've got these three levels. Fundamentally, I don't think that implementing GraphQL readies you for this world, or thinking about URI design, or migrating to the next version of OpenAPI spec. Right? All of these things are important. But in the world that's emerging, the technology needs to solve these problems of scale. So we as a firm, we've done some analysis. We're seeing huge opportunities right? Especially in the commercial banking space where John operates, huge SME markets, right? You could start to integrate your services, build them out, drive real revenue, but you can't do it in a way that requires high cost to serve, high cost to operate, and high cost to integrate. So the magic isn't providing the API and slapping on a developer portal. The new technology opportunity is to drive this with some scale. So let's look through these layers, right? So at the top, if I start embedding banking experiences in other places, how am I managing that risk to the brand and the license? How do I ensure that where my banking experience appears is not in a place I wouldn't want it to be? I can do it when I have 5 partners. I can do that manually. How do I do it if I have 1,000 different screens with hundreds and hundreds of different partners? How do I integrate at scale with 1,000 partners, right? If I want to go after a mass market proposition in Asia, empowering others to use banking services, how do I do that at scale? Identity is going to be a new problem to solve, right? As we move towards actually integrating systems together, is it enough to have a banking customer identity? Or maybe it's time to start developing things that we shelved in the past. You know, years ago we talked about user-managed access, and now self-sovereign identity is popping up as a new frontier, right? This might finally be the time where those kinds of technologies get traction. And then finally, how do you operate in this coreless manner at scale? And that doesn't mean just implementing a gateway for outbound connections, right? What it means is having procurement teams that reduce switching costs, having abstraction layers, driving industry standardization so you can easily switch between providers, right? All of that work. It's not just a technology problem, but the opportunity is for us to find and use technology to reduce the costs. Ultimately, conquering scaling comes down to changing the cost equation, right? So there's technologies we can use to make it cheaper and easier to do these kinds of integrations safely and at scale. So I'm going to hand over to John, and John's going to talk you through some of the exciting things he's doing to achieve that in the near term.
Lovely, thank you, Ronnie. So thank you for coming along today. My name is John Phenix. It's just a pleasure to speak with Ronnie. You know, there's real influencers in the industry like Mike and Ronnie and other, I think people, especially from the API Academy, I always look to them as real thought leaders in this space, and it's just a privilege to speak with him. So I'm John Phenix. I lead API architecture at HSBC Commercial Bank. So our customers are businesses. You know, they range from small businesses, mid-markets, up to the very large multinational customers and businesses. And I've kind of been on the journey that Ronnie outlined there in the 6 years I've been at HSBC. So I started off really around our internal transformation, working on internal APIs. And then we started to offer external APIs that our customers, who are businesses, access directly. And then over the last kind of 3 or 4 years, we've really evolved more into the banking as a service and embedded finance. And so today, I wanted to just make a couple of predictions based on my experience over the last 3 or so years around how the way that we design and also deliver our APIs will make a difference. And they really focus on this embedded finance space. It's a really interesting area. For me, embedded finance is that seamless embedding of the bank's financial services into partner platforms. And the key word there for me is seamless. The idea is that we make the experience so good for our potential customer that they want to use HSBC services in the place they already are. So instead of forcing potential customers to come and find the bank, we, the bank, go to the place where the customers already are and make ourselves contextually helpful where they are already. So for example, we've announced a partnership recently with Oracle NetSuite in the US. And there we've done a complete embedded finance solution that's live now, where we provide the ability for customers who use the Oracle NetSuite platform to pay their invoices directly from that platform. And they never come to HSBC. Even when they open up their bank account, it's all done in a seamless embedded style within that Oracle NetSuite platform. And there are two challenges that I've really been struggling with over the last couple of years. The first one is how to embed really complex products, financial products, in partner platforms while keeping that seamless experience. And the second one is how do you get to deliver the business outcomes quicker for our customers? So the first one, how do you embed complex financial products in partner platforms? And maybe I need to define what I mean by a complex financial product. Because if you're opening up a personal account, there's not much information you need to enter. You know, we can get it pretty quick. We can get it 15 minutes to open some bank accounts. But if you're a commercial customer, a business, especially a large multinational company, there are potentially hundreds of questions we need to ask you. We need to know who your directors are, where you do business, what type of business you do, what are the financial products you want to work with us. So there's an awful lot of contextual questions. So the questions we want to ask you depend on the answers to the previous questions that you gave. Another example of a complex product is making an international payment. Now again, for you and I, making a domestic payment through your bank account is very simple. It's the amount, the sort code, the account number, and a reference number, 4 fields, easy. But when you're making international payments, there are loads of different country regulation rules that we need to apply. And in fact, in HSBC, we used to have, we've changed it now, 800 distinct payment screens to capture the international payments. You know, we're in 65 different markets, so there are an awful lot of detailed logic that we need to enforce and to capture. So the challenge is, if we're going to make that seamless experience in a partner platform, how do we do that with these complex products? Well, I think there's 3 options. The first is pretty simple. You embed the bank's user interface into the partner user interface. So the red bit there is the HSBC island. You know, we've put it in an iframe or a div or something, and we've embedded it in it. It's very quick and easy. But it's not really the seamless experience that I think will make embedded finance successful. You know, it really feels like there's an island. There's a little bit of branding that you can do. But actually, when you go to mobile, it doesn't give the partner the opportunity to make a really compelling user experience. So I don't really think that's the future. Maybe for simple products, but not for complex ones. So the next solution may well be, well, why not get the partner to write that complex UI? You know, the bank's done it, so why don't we get the partner to do it? So everything's blue in that example. You know, the partner can create a really compelling user experience. They can really modify it. You know, if there's data they already know about the customer, they can pre-fill it. It would be great. But then again, that's why they came to the bank, because they didn't want to have to understand or learn all of those 800 different payment rules that are applied to international payments. And if we did this, we'd only really be able to partner with a couple of really big partners who have the capacity to do that. So I don't really think that works either. So the solution we've come up with is to get the partner to render the user interface, but based on the bank's logic. So what that looks like is that the partner creates all of the user interface. So for example, Oracle NetSuite created all of the user interface for onboarding the customer, for setting up virtual credit cards, for making payments, etc. But the bank retains the expertise that we have and provides that via an API to Oracle NetSuite and to other partners. And if you think about this, it's kind of almost like this API is a conversation, you know, that goes on, because it becomes a series of questions, and then the answers to those questions determine the next set of questions. And there's an API style that's just perfect for this, which is hypermedia style API. Now, if you're not familiar with hypermedia style APIs, I'd really recommend you, there's a brilliant video that Ronnie's done, if you search on YouTube, called The 5 Styles of APIs. I've reused or stolen the content in that many times. And speak to Mike about how forms and you know, some really good, amazing content. And for me, for years, I never got hypermedia APIs. I kind of understood it was like, you know, browsing the web. You got some content on a website that changes, the links change, you can navigate through it. But I never got what on earth their use was for financial applications. But now, I think this is a real sweet spot. So my first prediction is that embedded finance will lead to more hypermedia style APIs. And this isn't something I would have thought of a couple of years ago when I started this journey. So if you're not familiar with hypermedia style APIs, I definitely encourage you to look at that. So the next question is really, how do we deliver business outcomes quicker? You probably recognize this. Big box of Lego. I don't know if there's any Lego fans here or anyone brave enough to say that they are. Can't see any hands. Oh, there's one hand over there. So I love Lego. You know, I had a big box of Lego when I was a kid, and I couldn't afford Lego sets, but I had a big box of Lego. You know, your creativity is unlimited with Lego. And I think this is kind of what we do today with our APIs. You know, for HSBC, we've got a couple of hundred external APIs on our developer portal. And we expect people to come along and to assemble some business value out of those APIs. And that's okay for some of our customers, but most of our customers want this on the right-hand side. Now, I don't know if anyone knows what this Lego set is called. It's quite a famous one. It's called Big Red. It's my favorite Lego set, and it's my guilty lockdown obsession. Okay, I've got back into Lego, but now into Lego sets. And the box of Lego on the left-hand side there is still fun, but what I really want is the Lego set on the right-hand side. I want the outcome. And this kit is amazing. You know, it goes in and out, the boom, up and down, it rotates and all this kind of stuff. And it's got one engine and this insanely beautiful gearbox that drives all of this. I couldn't create that gearbox myself. And I think when I talk to our business customers, they want less of the left-hand side, the box of Lego. They want more of the right-hand side. They want to get the outcomes that they want as quickly as possible. So the flexibility is great. We still provide the individual APIs, but we want to give them API sets of APIs that work well together. I think Mark called them API packages this morning. So what's an example of an API set? Well, the one that we delivered to Oracle NetSuite is a good example of that. The outcome that the business customers want is to pay their invoices really easily. So they want an API set called invoice payments. And what is it made up of? Well, it's a series of APIs that work independently, but also work together really well. So there's an onboarding API. This is live. It's a hypermedia style API. And it was the first time we'd ever done this. You know, we've never been able to completely onboard a new-to-bank customer via a headless API before. And then combined with virtual payment APIs, virtual card APIs, payments. And very importantly as well, because the customer never comes to speak to HSBC directly, all of their interaction has to be via the partner. So we have to start automating things like complaints and queries and questions. So we also have servicing APIs. There's other examples of API sets, but I'll skip over that in terms of time. What I really wanted to talk about was the API set experience. Because for me, that's the critical thing. You know, it's got to be easier to use the API set than it is to assemble it yourself using the individual APIs. Just like it's got to be easier for me to build a Big Red Lego set from the instructions from Lego and all the pre-configured bricks, rather than me having to go out and find them and work out how to create it myself. So this APIs and an API set really have to work seamlessly together. I want to register once to use that API set. I don't want to have to register for each individual API, especially as APIs in an API set may not just come from me. We might be creating sets of APIs that come from multiple providers. Got to have a simple set of instructions, a single identity. This is really something that was a real challenge for us. We've created something called an API passport that hides all of the complexity of our different internal systems and allows single access to all of our APIs. And also the experience in terms of support and billing have to be at that set level. I think the interesting outcome of this for me, though, is what effect it's had on the way that we develop internally. So we started off with our APIs trying to hide the complexity of the bank. You know, it's a big bank in lots of countries with lots and lots of systems. And so we created an abstraction layer at the edge to hide that complexity. But now we're really driving to remove that complexity. And these API sets are really helping us to do that because, as Ronnie said, to really be successful, we need to be able to do what we were doing before, but cheaper and quicker with less operational staff. So my second prediction is that we'll see more API sets to deliver business outcomes quicker. But importantly, it's going to be the API sets with the best API experience that are going to win. So to close, as Ronnie said, scaling is the new challenge for banking. And I've just covered a couple of hints here. There are more we could have covered, but I do believe that hypermedia style APIs plays an important part in embedded finance and any area actually where you need to embed a complex user interface in a third-party platform. And also the importance of creating API sets, collections of APIs that work seamlessly together to deliver the business outcome as quickly as possible at the lowest cost. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions.
I was so engrossed in the talk. Yes, question up here? Yes. Go ahead and shout it out and they'll repeat your question.
So this works out very fine for web applications, but what do you do with the question web view versus native app?
Was it web view versus mobile native?
Yeah.
Exactly. That's why I think the hypermedia style API works. Because if we just embedded our current user interface for making payments, it might work on a desktop, doesn't work on a mobile. So just providing an API that provides the data you need to capture, and maybe we do provide some UI hints in that API as well, in the hypermedia API. We say these fields are mandatory, these fields of this, you know, so that you can do some validation on the client side, but we don't deliver the UX, we just deliver the data that drives the UX.
Okay, I think we're out of time. Thank you very much. Thank you.